everything is pain.
I am rolling.
I'll hold on. Okay. All right, now I'm rolling.
Go ahead and talk for a minute.
Okay, I will continue talking. I had to go and look up because I wanted to get the AV Club thing up on the Magician, so I had the title in my head this time. And you're ready to talk about it. This will be fun because at the end you'll be like, David, you saw the WonderCon panel, and I'll just kill myself.
And I'll be like, why did David do that? How many reasons are there for that?
Oh, dude. I do kind of. I will say this though: the Entertainment Weekly binge reviewer was not a fan of the final episode, and I kind of agree because it was too much obsessed with setting up the second season, and so it just kind of took away from a lot of. I mean, there were some powerful moments in it, some very powerful moments, and the last 15 minutes are spent setting up a season 2. It's really annoying. It's really obnoxious. I was very annoyed, but I'm glad I'm done with the show now because it was fucking with my brain, and I just needed to be done with it. Just eating away. I caught up on that. Finished up on Legion, which is
cool. Still excited to watch that when I have the time.
I'm excited for you to watch that. It's only 8 episodes.
I know. It's just I don't know.
And so I got a couple other things to catch up on. And then in May, I'll subscribe to Star so I can watch me some American Gods.
You've almost got time to watch those top 100 movies.
Yeah, well, Persona happened. I mean, I'm gonna try. I do have a show gap because all the CW shows are off for a month, and I've caught up on I have a lot of things. There's a couple of shows that I'm actually so far behind on. I'm gonna need so far behind on that I have to figure out some other ways of watching a couple episodes, and then be able to watch the ones that I actually can watch to be able to then watch the ones I can watch, but.
All right, I have started a new track because none of that was Magicians related. And
you told me to talk. It never fit. It never said it was fine. Then we were talking about other things. You know what? Screw
I
you.
did say it was fine. So I'm rolling. Are you rolling?
Well, I have to start a new track now.
All right, start a new track.
Yeah. Starting a new track.
Okay, you rolling?
Yeah.
1, 2,
3, 4.
Okay.
Okay. Say what's. Where is this from? Library? No, the what is that? The internet startup company called?
It's the offices of Fuzzbeat.
Fuzzbeat?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the Life in the Kraken podcast Fillory edition, your dose of the magicians deep from the offices of Fuzzbeat. I'm your host, David Robertson, editor-in-chief of We've Always Lived in the Kraken blog. And alongside me, I have joining me, managing editor of the same blog, Josh Kayusewicz.
Listen, David, you may have noticed I'm missing some fingers here, but I'm not going to tell you why exactly. It's just a cool part of my backstory. You'll never know.
Okay. Since the rage has already started. But
no, that wasn't rage. That was awesome.
Okay. I just want to make sure. Well, we're going to discuss Season 2, Episode 10 of The Magicians, The Girl Who Told Time. Last week's... Well, I guess considering we had to kind of take a little break, but the culmination of the episodes of both last week's and the week's before episodes kind of broke both of us, especially. Well, sorry. Let me do this because we did 2 different, didn't we?
What?
Yeah, I need to redo that.
Okay.
Sorry. These past couple of episodes have been a little rough for Caillou and I. They may have broken us a little bit, but we can hope things can get better. I think there's definitely some progress this week in some areas, namely in that I've just decided that the best part of the show is actually wherever Quentin is, as long as he's not having to deal with multiple storylines at once. So just let him focus on one. ignore the rest of it, and the rest of the show can just burn. That's where I'm at this point.
Wow, you're really joining me here in the pits of despair. It's great.
No, I mean it's not so much that. It's just that the Quentin stuff is the one stuff that I find that they seem to mostly have a handle on, and the rest of it is just so all over the place that the Quentin stuff is the main reason I think I was so annoyed with how the things happened in the Quentin storyline last week, is it's the only storyline that hasn't that I had at least expected to go well, and so when it went poorly, it really annoyed me.
Yeah.
Whereas at this point, like the rest of it, I'm just like, if it's good, I'm happy. If it's not, I no longer judge it. It's just is what it is. And to some degree, Elliot's storyline kind of gets that pass, but he's so ingrained now with the poor parts of the Fillory storyline that it kind of is hurting his own stuff. Like he kind of finished his whole thing, and now he's just kind of stuck. But
well, so let's. I mean, I think you can agree that like for once we actually need like a normal recap because so much goddamn shit happened in this episode.
Fine.
Okay. Because this was like a table setting episode, so it set up like 35 tables.
True.
We learned Julia's specialty, which is kind of like studying magic, and we saw that in like a part of the season 1 time loop. Not sure how important that is going forward, but maybe just important to remind us that the time loop existed. We have Julia's plotline, where she's with Quentin, where she is kind of finally this time feeling the fact that she doesn't have a shade and being kind of unhappy about that, and Quentin is trying to help her after he has a pot-fueled vision of her shade lost in another world. We have in Fillory, Elliot plans a lavish private wedding, then switches to a public wedding to try and turn his approval numbers around, a process that involves bringing Josh in to cater. And then Josh is like, why don't I make a love potion so that your guests will love you? And then there's like a whole weird off-screen Foo Fighters plot. Margot tells Fen about the fairy deal, and then Fen freaks out and then gets like fairy napped. So presumably she'll be replaced next week with like a changeling Fen. Penny started working for the librarians with Katie's help. Together they discover that Fuzzbeat, the clickbait online news organization, is actually an online spell repository run by Marley Matten, who tries to help Julia get the info she needs from the library on how to kill Reynard by attempting to suborn a librarian, prompting some exposition about the poison room where the librarians keep all the really dangerous books. That plotline was ridiculously complicated. With the Dean's help, Quentin and Julia are able to contact a version of Alice from a previous time loop, but apparently not the same one from the Julia that we saw in the beginning. Anyway, that Alice did some shade research after her Quentin was killed by the beast, and she told him that shades go to the underworld. The only way to go there is to die or talk to an ancient one, which we learn is a dragon. So, book 2, ahoy.
I'm waiting for the plane to fly over.
Sure.
Is there a plane flying behind another plane? Yes, the one way to make David excited about any storyline, add a dragon to it. So the pandering is well noted, magicians, and yes, obviously, book 2 ahoy indeed. I will say that I mean, look, there's parts of this episode that work really well. I guess I should briefly say that it's possible that was the same timeline as the Julia from the beginning, because the whole point is Alice is the only one who survives that end of timelines. We don't actually know.
Well, when do they get their specialties? Is it before or after the beast attack? I guess it's before.
It's definitely before.
Okay.
Because that's why Alice is able to go to the physical kid's house. Quentin, as in the show as in the books, he's just sent there because they don't know what else to fucking do with him.
No, I kept thinking during that scene that that the beast attack that killed them all was the one in the classroom, but it was actually the one where in our timeline Alice gave her life. I think. Or the one before that at the end of season 1. It's unclear.
it's unclear. My assumption is that in some of the storylines they're murdered by the attack in the classroom, and other timelines they are not, because that's clearly how they change things each time. And by changing it, she probably was able to prevent things each time.
Yeah.
And so initially, because they definitely have a scene in season 1 where it shows them all dead in the classroom. So I'm fairly certain that does happen. And it may have actually pretend it was a dream, but now I'm actually wondering if it was like a residual timeline, like bleed.
Yeah.
Like the timeline thing was cool in that like they're acknowledging these other timelines happen, and kind of also acknowledging that they may still try to like tell some interesting stories with that. I have a little bit more information I can attest to this about when we have a surprise addition to this podcast at the end about the Magician's WonderCon panel. But
oh my god,
I did enjoy that. I enjoyed seeing, like, I guess, presumably you can now see why Fogg's attitude for Julia, at least this season, now that they probably told him this, makes more sense, because in the past, like, she was like his like prize pupil.
Yeah,
he's the only one who knows that.
Yeah, it's which does do we ever figure out, like, did the show ever tell us why Julia being the mixed fucked things up? Because it seems like she's very smart and capable and would have like helped to fight the beast.
Actually, the one thing the show made a very big deal about was that she was just like systematically trying things. My assumption is that each time she changed one thing, and she decided to change Julia, and it could even be that like you could find out in the 5 timelines before that she'd actually changed one of everyone else. Like, this is the timeline in which like Alice wasn't there. This is the timeline in which we don't know. I mean, that's
sure. I'm just saying, like, not why it was done, but like why it happened to work this time. Like, I'm not sure if the show had said something like, without Julia, Quentin does this differently or something.
The only reason I think that made it different was that without Julia, there's two things you can make concerned that with Julia not being there probably help with. One, without Julia being there, Quentin's realization of like him having to deal with what it meant for Julia to be away from him and his stuff to do with Alice is probably what allowed him to realize. Them not being there, plus Alice, plus him being told about the time loops, especially because the way Jane told him about the time loops made it sound like he was the star of each time loop. Made Quentin realize that he is, the supporting character in this time loop, which is why he decided to give the potion to Alice. And so you can make an assumption that there's a good chance that in past versions he never did that. The other version, and the other thing I've kind of wondered is if it's just the very idea that Julia having a different perspective on magic and having dealt with different stuff and different motivations made her a variable that like the beast wasn't prepared for, which is why she's able to stick it behind him and then take him away. Because the whole key there was they needed to get, they needed to get out of that room, because they always died in that room where they all went to confront the beast and he killed them all. And so that was the thing. That's where clearly that was the current.
Well, then that does make it very clear that she needed to be outside the group in order to do that, and in order to want to do that, she had to be raped. In order to be raped, she had to be outside the group. So that makes sense while tying into the show's, like, at this point, overwhelmingly consistent, like, the world hates Julia and women kind of deal. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
I mean, as I said, it's hard to like, but the actual factor of was like I assume Jane probably felt this. Jane probably had no idea any of these were going to succeed. Like, she just had to hope, and then she was just going to keep doing it. And
it's explicit in the show that the time loop, like, what happens is that, like, she makes another change, and then the time loop ends without coming to fruition. And so, like, there's that scene towards the end of season 1 where they're like, this is the only chance that we'll ever have to fix this, because, like, the time looping is done. Whereas in the book, the time loop does not end until it ends positively with the beast's death.
Oh yeah. No. I just meant in this one they changed because I'm talking about just how the time loops worked in general. Obviously, they made some extra levels in this time loop because Jane died.
Yeah.
And they made it much more active. She has to do this for it to work. And then the time loop in the book is a lot more. it's not quite as involved as the one in the show is. Like, it's used, but it's not. Literally, they redo the entirety of break bills each time.
Well, they do though. It's just off screen because the way he backloads that revelation. But like every aspect of that was part of the time loop, and it was the focus of that storyline was Quentin going like, "Why did you arrange things such that you killed Alice?" And she's like, "That was the only way that worked."
Oh, yeah, but I thought in the books they do more of the time loop stuff discussion, more specifically that final like battle sequence, not like everything they do. Like
no, I think it's everything because she's there in the very beginning. She's the one who gets Quentin to go to Breakbills.
Yeah,
so
I guess the difference is that she doesn't really talk about, like, she doesn't explicitly say, for example, that Julie was in the Breakbills, for example, like they do in here.
No, I think that is actually. I think that may be an invention of the show. I don't remember.
Yes, that is definitely an invention of the show. Okay. They do not mention. She does not mention things like that. I had always interpreted her talking about the timeline to interpret that the time loop she created was actually that like final battle sequence that she just kept redoing over and over again until it worked. But it may have been everything because it has been a while since I've read that. I have read that sequence itself. So fair enough. I thought the show the big thing the show did was they made it more explicit about Julia, which you could argue implicitly. There's no way that couldn't have been the case. Like, you could argue, if you think about it, there's probably a good chance that something like that did actually happen in the book's time loop as well. Or at the very least, something that could have happened, but he didn't feel like mentioning, But I'd always assumed the show's time loop was a much grander time loop, and then they also, of course, changed where in the show it wasn't self-perpetuating.
Whereas, yeah, well, the biggest like change thematically between the two is that in the show, there's the moment that I just mentioned where like the time loop ends and Quentin and the gang get to step forward and be heroes and like take ownership of their own plot. And the lesson in the book is the exact opposite: is that Quentin gets through this entire like experience that he thinks is personal to him and grueling and something that he endures, for the sake of everyone. And then he learns that he's like, not only is he not even the hero, he's not even like an active character because he's just been the pawn of this entire other plot line that he didn't even know about.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a definite part, especially when she like rubs it in, because in the you don't find out what happened to Martin until literally that explanation in the book either. Like in the book, when you find out that Martin was like abused as a child.
We learn his backstory then.
It's like a final twist to the knife in which she's like, oh, by the way, make you even more. Martin only became this way because of this, and it's like, really, you're going to tell me this now after all this stuff? Whereas obviously in the show, they made a really big deal about trying to get that out of the way early to establish like what happened. And mainly because in their case, because
the book like that, in terms of it being a twist of the knife, that's the book like that's like the final thing that specifically is like shattering Quentin's like innocent view of Fillory.
Right. It's like the final part of like, oh, by the way, Plover is a monster, and so everything really was a lie. And Quentin,
which like can I if I can like transition us back to this episode, it seems like the bloom is like completely off the rails for Quentin because like we had talked about like the possibility that Quentin, when he came back to Fillory, would like come in and be like, "This is Fillory, guys. We gotta fix this. We gotta do better. We gotta stop being the patriarch.
He's just drunk.
We gotta do this." And he's just fucking drunk, and he's been drunk for like months.
Yeah.
And Margot is finally like, "You have to stop this. You have to stop."
I will say
fucking something.
I do like his attitude now. I do wish they'd given him a little time to like fully like pretend he enjoyed Fillory, because it would make this loss of it to him feel a little more profound. Whereas right now, I'm like, of course he doesn't like Fillory. What? I mean, I could understand the show's viewpoint if maybe in their thought was the book tried to at least pretend a little bit, whereas the show kind of like gave him a very brief moment, but it was like very brief, and then after that, it's just been taking it away bit by bit because they just want to shatter it. Which, all right, that's a way you can go about it. But I kind of wish there was just something to make it feel like more of a loss. If like, because right now, if like when I am interested to see, because they're going towards book 2 stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested to see how they're going to approach this because, in the book, it's a punishment, or not punishment's not the right word. It's a consequence that, let's just say, Quentin's adventures in Fillory get interrupted by events in the second book. Whereas here, it's just kind of like, I don't know, I think he'll be fine. Like, I mean, not like great, but he'll be as good as he would have been anyhow.
Well, I think that it's, I don't know. I would like to say, and I think in a better version of this show, of the show that they want to achieve, as opposed to the show I wish they would achieve, even a better version of that, like, it would be more about being cut off from his friends, because he obviously in this show doesn't give a shit about, like, his role, really. Like, it's kind of shocking how, like, with no real, like, intervening material Fillory wise, like, he's gone from the beginning of the season where he was super excited to be a king to this episode where being a king is like somebody whose name I've forgotten brings me more wine, and that's what I use my king powers for.
I do actually wonder if you're right there, because when they brought Josh in, finally back, I was like, oh, now we're getting into, we can't avoid this. So we're getting into semi-spoiler book 2 territory. I can't. Yeah. I've really tried, because this is one of the greatest endings of books of all time. So, like, if you haven't read book 2, just, I don't know, stop listening for 3 minutes.
If you haven't read book 2, like, now is the goddamn time.
So in the books, Quentin saves the day for a variety of things, but effectively speaking, he sort of pseudo helps somewhat save the day in a small way, and more so he helps save the day in that he helps really Julia. Not so much saves the day as in, like, he saves the world. Like, that's more like Penny's job and other people's.
This is another, if I can briefly bitch here, this is another instance of a show taking something where the book is like, it's going to start off looking like this, but it'll end up being about this. And they're just like, why not cut out the middleman and have it be about that from the beginning? So his quest right now is about helping Julia.
I mean, based on this show, I'm okay with it. That's fine. It's the most impactful. For this character, and since I've actually mostly liked Quentin's journey and how they actually portrayed him on this show, I'm fine with it. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. I can understand you liking the idea of them doing both and only doing one is a simpler and not as cool way, but whatever. Anyhow, he eventually goes for a grand quest. His quest ultimately is to help Julia, and he does, but to do so, he basically has to take on, like, her punishment per se for things that have happened to her, and she's done, which is a lot of complicated stuff into. And in effect,
the reasons don't matter. The point is that, like, in order to complete his quest,
he has to do a bunch of events, and in the end, when he does them, he basically gets banished from Fillory.
Yeah,
and he ends up with and he has this great line in which he's like, "But I'm the hero. Like, does this mean I get, effectively this idea of, like, I deserve, like, don't I get a reward?" And they're like, actually, no, being the hero means you lose everything.
Right.
And he's basically sealed from Fillory and locked away from his friends forever. Hypothetically, that's the end of the book. That is setting it up. There's also the secondary part of him also being denied a greater adventure, but whatever. So I actually agree that it does seem like what they could be setting up is, in this final scene, is that, especially because, we've been wondering if they were going to bring up the map maker and make him as big a deal of a character as he is in the books.
Benedict,
which now I think it seems to be setting up that I think we may have a similar deal to what Quentin had to do to help Benedict, but he's actually going to make it for Julia to help get her shade back. And you could definitely see the idea ended up being that, like, Quentin does all this stuff and he is then sealed away from Fillory and thus his friends. And whereas in the book, there's another character, and Josh are basically the people who take Quentin and Julia's places as king and queens. I could actually see it being that, like, Julia and Josh actually have to become king and queens, and then Quentin's is basically left with no one.
Well, so here's my problem with that. Here's why I think the show won't do that. Is because, like, to put it bluntly, they do not seem to have the balls to do such things. Like, this is a show that it is, like, inherently shying away from significant consequences for anything. Like, it keeps bringing back Alice's actress to do things. And I'm not saying that's wrong necessarily. I'm just saying it's indicative of like in a different show, she would have died and that would have been the consequence. And living with that would not involve bringing her back in these different ways. And so I feel like the show is like on a meta level of like firing all its cast members, and then on just a narrative level of having consequences. I do not think the show is prepared to make this the Quentin show at all.
Well, I mean,
and I think it would be stupid if it made it the Quentin show and the like people in Fillory show, and never the twain shall meet again.
Yeah, but of course, the reason that your argument is entirely apt is there's a reason why they have to do the stuff with Alice based on what happens in book 3 of the books. And you've just now, of course, made my argument for why I was annoyed about certain things that happened in the 3rd book, but we're not even going to get into that. But also based on, and you're also now making my argument for why I got annoyed about, oh wait, you're basically making my argument why I got annoyed about a lot of the events in the 3rd book.
I disagree that I'm making your arguments, but we're not going to do that today. So
because that's what that book does, undoes all consequences.
We're not going to do that. We're not going to do that.
Just like the books. Just like the books figure out a way
not going to do that thing.
Just like the books anyhow figure out a way to fix this problem. The show obviously would as well. And it's not like, my point is that decision would have the exact same impact and end with the same results, because in the books they don't have that actual impact. So I mean, it's hard for, I can't yell at the show about potentially not sticking those as consequences when the book, whether or not you think they did it correctly, also undoes those consequences. So, I mean, it's gonna, now whether or not they're going to do it well, I don't know. How much they're going to commit to it, I also don't know. But this
I know they're not going to do it well, because they don't really do much of anything well, in my opinion.
Well, they generally do the stuff with Quentin well, which it just depends how much Quentin's able to stay on his own before they have to force the rest of the story back. Like, Quentin was able to run away from the rest of the plot this week, or at the very least, he was able to like take a specific part of it and run away from like Julia's A. Renard plot.
Yeah.
And instead make it a personal Julia and Quentin journey, because this stuff kind of, this reinforced once again that like those actors have great chemistry and they've just have been needed to be on screen together. And the fact the show continuously had wasted it or relied so much on the chemistry between them to make scenes work was even more frustrating when we finally got an episode in which they were able to just talk to each other about shit and like have conversations and like be in the same room together and like function.
Yeah.
And like, you know, that's why I like the storyline work. You know, made the stuff with Fogg work as well when he was talking to her. You know, Julia's storyline worked in this episode because like it was focused and they split it up. Katie took over like the Renard part of it. You know, she took over basically just the Shade part of it, and then Quentin came to help with that. I thought
I mean, maybe Renard is just like plot poison, because I don't think that plotline did Katie any favors this episode either.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Look, as always, I avoid things involving Penny, so that'll get talked about. But I'm going to talk about things that don't annoy me first, or force the poor actress or force poor Katie to consistently be in terrible situations where she's awesome and she's great, but everything around her is poison.
Well, let me briefly say then, since you brought him up, that once again the Dean has like the best line in the episode. When Quentin is when they're talking about the Tesla flexion, and Quentin is like, invented by Nikola Tesla, and he goes, no, by Fred Flexion.
And Quentin just like, oh.
And the Dean is just like, you fucking moron. Why am I in the same room with you?
Yeah, that was pretty good. It's also, I think, also now knowing the like Julia Dean relationship, it also makes a little more sense why the Dean's always kind of been like, fuck you, Quentin, is because like presumably Jane, because Jane still does kind of imply that Quentin is the importance of the time loop. And so the reason Julia got removed was effectively partially just to see what would happen to Quentin if Julia wasn't there with him. I think is part of it. And so the Dean probably also was like, yes, I lost her, but had to be stuck with you, this moron. I mean, God.
Well, I mean, there is like, I don't know. I don't think the way the Dean acts towards Julia throughout any of this really makes a lot of sense. Because like, if I were the Dean and I had those memories, I would be like, now that the time loop is over, Julia, why don't you come be a student again? Because I know how much potential you have. Like, Julia, why don't I help you? And instead he's like, he gives her asylum for that brief period of time. And then in this episode, he like, I'm go wherever you want, get out of here.
My assumption is they try to suggest, I think, just like the pain of he probably like had dealt with it too much and seen her die so many times that like it just like he couldn't, and probably the guilt he felt knowing that like her life is what it was because of something he couldn't stop. Now, I'm not necessarily saying like this is like justifies his like attitude towards her. I mean, sorry, it does. I'm not trying to do this to like excuse it. It's just like I'm just like trying to give context why I think probably he acts that way. I mean, that seemed to give the vibe he gave off, but and then we'll just get to I guess the nitty gritty of this though. Like, so they go and he goes and talks, like you said, he goes and talks to an Alice who was like the only survivor of her timeline, and as you said, was missing like 3 fingers, and apparently she had to pay those prices for like information, which was kind of cool.
Can I say like I was very conflicted during the scene because like there's a lot of stuff going on here in terms of my relationship with the show. Like on the one hand, you have like this Tesla flexion thing, which is that something the show does very often, where it's just like we've never mentioned this before, but there just happens to be a convenient thing over here that's magic that you can use to do this, and there are rules about this that are totally arbitrary, and we're just gonna do it because that's the way we want to do it. And from the Quentin side of things, I am like. I'm about done with like Quentin and Alice like tearfully get closure on their relationship scenes. We've had like 5 of them so far. That needs to be done with. On the other hand, from the Alice side of things, this was like the best one of those from her side because suddenly I felt like she had a character, even in those 2 minutes, who like had so much more going on with her than she normally has. Like it just feels like that in that scene. I was suddenly seeing things from her perspective in a way that I hadn't yet.
No, I mean, that's why I like the scene. I think they've been trying to figure out a way to give one that it's been hard to figure out a way to give one that can give closure to both, like to both of them.
Yeah.
Since like Alice is no longer there.
Yeah.
So they've been trying to do a couple different ones. I mean, I haven't actually minded most of them because, I felt the one with the illusion spell worked really well because it showed this toxic idea of how Quentin, like the bad way for Quentin to get over Alice.
I mean, I'm not saying I've minded them. I'm saying like it's good material, and the show knows it's good material. But if you look at them in a row, like there has to be a point in which they just stopped having this scene.
Yeah, my assumption is that I feel like this one feels like it should be one of the last ones. Like of this, just because if you look at Quentin in this scene, like he says stuff, more of what he says is for her sake.
Yeah.
Instead, like he's trying to give comfort to this one version and like, but he doesn't make it about himself, which I think he absolutely would have like in past versions. I think especially after the scene of him letting her go, they fucked it up, but like, the representation of when he does let her go from his body is supposed to be like him like trying to move on. As we talked about, they don't do it as well as they should have.
Yeah.
And it was too quick. And they really needed another episode to properly do that and not force him to be a part of another plot line as railroad him into Julia's plot line to force that to happen.
I mean, to be fair, there were a couple things in this episode, especially towards the beginning, that like addressed concerns I had about the previous episode, like the line about I was so annoyed last episode because like they didn't mention librarians at all, and at this episode they were like, oh, it takes them a while to process his application, and I was like, that's fine. I wish you told me that last week.
Well, I mean, he signed up for it at like the very end of the episode, so
no, the very end of the episode before the last episode, the previous episode, he's just running around and like has no duties yet.
Well, no, because the end of the last episode is when he seals her away, and he doesn't make no. It's the end of last episode when he does it.
When Penny does it?
Yeah.
Because
the episode.
I don't remember that.
All right. Well, you can't have this argument on.
Okay. I can cut this out, but like I
No,
thought
we
that,
can. We can just continue that discussion. No, so what happens is because the last episode when they seal Julia away. So what? And the reason they do it is because she does all of the ridiculous stuff to do it. And part of that episode is that Katie, meanwhile, then is like looking for. Katie, meanwhile, is looking for. Oh, I see what you're saying. Hold on.
yeah, the last episode, Penny was, I forget what he was doing, but he was certainly doing. He was not doing library stuff, and he had already signed away at the end of the previous episode.
Hold on. Okay, let me think here. So they're looking for the book. This is what happens because we had to do those episodes. Those episodes all combined together. It's fucked
I know
up.
that fucked us up.
Okay, so we had the heist episode.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the episode after the heist episode was
the one where Penny signs his life away at the end of the episode, and then we had one after that.
Give me fuck the Penny side of it. I'll remember Penny's an unimportant storyline. Everyone else mattered. I need everyone else's storylines.
Okay.
Last week's episode, because last week's episode was the fucking duel. That's why. Okay.
Yeah.
That's why. No, because no one does anything last episode other than the fucking duel. That's why I got fucking confused.
Look, the show only has 2 gears. It's either way too fast or fucking nothing happens.
Okay, so hold on. Okay, so the duel happened last episode, and Penny
was dealing with the senator. That's what was Penny was doing.
And then the librarians. Okay. Oh well, I think the reason I understood. Okay. I think the reason I didn't have a problem with it was because it made sense to me that whatever deal Penny signed would always be the exclusion of like I have to be able to use the information that you just gave me, and that was what he was doing. This is the episode in which I needed them to talk about it, and they did, like literally immediately.
Do we need to like go back and fix that, or what? How much of that is staying in?
I don't know. This is what happened. Look, already this is why I had to redo that one part where I was like 2 episodes, 3 episodes. God damn it.
Okay, I'll tell you what. Let me go back and say my thing again, and then you say what you just said about how it didn't bother you last episode, but you needed this episode, and then we can move on.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Well, I will say this episode did some things to kind of assuage my concerns about last episode, like when the line about Penny saying that the librarians needed some time to process his application, which is why I was annoyed last week that they didn't say that, because I was like, he pledged his life away and now nothing's happening. What's going on?
Sorry, I'm just thinking. Did we just not rant about we went on the Penny rant about it last week?
I ranted about it last week.
No, that's what I'm saying. But last week's when it like broke us, right? Because we were like, this
yes, last week is the one where like I was like, fuck the show, and you joined me by the end of the episode.
But it was because we were talking about it. Why did we bitch so much about it then in the...
I don't know if we bitched super much about Penny last week. Penny didn't do anything last week.
Well, we bitched about I guess it's just their episodes are because we did them so close together. I think.
Yeah, it's because we did them like 3 days apart,
and we had the 3 episodes at once. That's probably what it was. Yeah. All right, I guess I didn't have as much of a problem with them not mentioning it last week, purely because the episode was so little about Penny last week, and it made sense to me that Penny made the deal, but since the deal was to specifically get information, that it would be understood that he has to actually help the information be at least used. This week, I definitely needed it because, the library, based on that, I could totally see the librarians like, yeah, we let you go on this little mission, but now we need you to, do your thing. So I'm glad they mentioned it. And I did enjoy him being like, him saying that, and then them immediately being summoned, and they're like, we did your paperwork, and kind of representing the fact that like the bureaucracy was like, yeah, we're as slow as we want to be, but we're also as fast as we want to be. So in this case,
can I just say that like, the librarians in the book are like super mysterious, and that makes them kind of cool. And when Penny shows up as a badass, that just shows how cool they are, because they're just off screen the whole time. The show is like not figured out anything to do with them other than like fucking hacky jokes and style about like bureaucracy and like the constantly canted angles, and they're just like the most annoying fucking people. I can't stand them.
I think the problem is that the book also didn't show you the actual librarians doing things, like being librarians. at first. They showed them being like interdimensional travelers who do like crazy stuff. Because you remember when we finally have that scene where like you have Penny talking to them, and he's like in the library, like he still comes off as like a dick. He comes off as like he kind of comes off as like annoying as hell, and like he's not cool.
In the book, you mean?
Yeah, in the book. When they finally in the book, when like Penny, when you see Penny again for the first time and he's being all heroic and stuff, like, oh, really interesting. Penny became his own person, and it represents this thing of like Penny becoming like the kind of hero Quentin wanted to become. But when you actually have them go and talk to Penny, like in the library, and he's acting like an actual librarian, he goes back to being like the most like he acts like these librarians do, kind of. He's very obnoxious. And so I wonder if they thought they were like, well, we need to show this, but they made the mistake of like, I agree with you. They probably should have. I could have really used like, even if it's just been a simple thing, like more badass examples of how like, the woman who's been like the main librarian doing something ridiculous at some point. Like to stop something. I mean, she did a couple of interesting things, but like they never stopped it. Like even if it had just been like, you know, it could have been a good way to actually further express why Penny should join her. Like Penny's like, why you guys are ridiculous, and then she does some ridiculous spell that does something. Like that would have been a really good way to have helped also further make Penny's decision not be as ridiculous. Like Penny's decision not just be so silly.
Yeah, there's like so in this episode I had like a fuck you Penny moment where like he walks into the magical BuzzFeed offices and is like what does he look at? It's like a flamingo. No, it's a unicorn wearing a suit, something like that.
Yeah, he's like a unicorn wearing a like night suit, like a hat and a suit or something like that.
Yeah, and Penny is just like, ugh. And I'm like, that's Penny, that's your whole goddamn personality. No matter what's in front of you, you're just like, ugh. He's like the people that like Louis C.K. makes fun of. He just hates everything for no good reason. Where like most people are like, hey, that's really cool. That's like that's funny. That's interesting. That's and the only exception is that like the librarians are the people that are just the physical embodiment of like things that should be at.
I mean I think one of the problems is that Katie's character is actually what Penny's character needs to be. Like she has some of that attitude, but then she doesn't use it. Like it's not there all the time, but she still also kind of has that reaction to things. So when she has that reaction, it works.
She has like a no nonsense personality, whereas Penny is just like a fucking dick who has like no joy to him. And like I think that they make a good pairing romantically because of the way that they're both like kind of non-traditional people who push other people away and then they found each other, so that works. But like when they're not being romantic, like in this episode, they made very bad like kind of buddy cop pairing to me because Katie, because he's awful and Katie is like a normal human being, and there's not enough like contrast there for her to like bounce off of him really. So it just didn't work for me.
And yeah, it's true. And to make contrast, they kind of had to like really go deep into his ridiculousness.
Yeah,
like he kind of acted even more like a dick early in the episode, and they tried to use that as an example. And of course, they tried to like by making like the Fuzzbeat editor actually curse things and everything, make it sound like it was
like the Fuzzbeat editor was his like real like foil in that scene because like she was irrepressible and not taking his shit, which is the character that he needs to be paired with, and that he's basically like never paired with.
Except that's why the Margot in his scenes work really well.
Yeah.
And then I mean he needs different energies, but I just meant more like they made him actually even seem like more of a dick, and like the Fuzzbeat person he was just like a massive dick too the entire time, and it like even more so than normal, and it kind of didn't work. And then
it's like Penny, don't be a dick to Marley, Matt. And she was on the West Wing. Come on, man.
Well, also I think it was also annoying because clearly part of that scene was to set up like you have that conflict where he's like, yeah, these books are sealed away because they're dangerous. And Katie's like, whatever. But then it's like Penny's like on the librarian side. But I'm just like, yeah, the librarians haven't done enough to like his reaction of being on their side in that scene later with her didn't make any sense to me. Because I'm like, yeah, they still haven't done enough to like Penny, why would you side with them on anything? Like,
yeah,
especially considering how angry you were about like, the part Penny is also supposed to represent is like Penny's supposed to be the dude that like doesn't think certain. and they only half do this. He like is the dude who doesn't think certain sacrifices or these like ideas of noble sacrifices or like greater good things. He's the one who thinks that's bullshit.
Well, so here's the problem with the argument
that's one of the. Well, I'm saying like that's something he's supposed to be, and they don't do it enough with him, and then they screw up the rest of it. So even when he does do that, it doesn't work because it should be like Penny's the one who would react the way he does to the dude sacrificing himself and be like, "Wait, that's ridiculous." And they don't, and he does it, and it doesn't work because like they've screwed his character up so much.
Yeah, but here's the problem I just thought of specifically with like that argument between him and Katie, which is that like, on the one hand, he is correct that some things are super dangerous and maybe not everybody should have them, but the like in the real world we give those dangerous things to people who are capable of using them. Like Katie needs a god killing spell so she can kill this god because nobody else is going to do it for her, and that's because this world that they've built does not have like a police force. It like the actual answer in the real world is that she should go to the librarians or whoever has control of the power to kill a god and say, this god needs to be killed, can you go kill him for me because he's a rapist and he needs to be brought to justice. And that doesn't seem to exist in this world because they've like taken the world that Lev Grossman built, which didn't really have any significant evil in it, and filled it with evil without actually changing the systems that would then arise in response to that.
I mean, to be fair, in the books, Grossman also kind of says there's no one to deal with the god there either. It's for different reasons, but like one of the flaws we've talked about in the books is that there are like gaps of certain things he does that don't ever quite add up. They're like small things, but I'm not surprised that when adapting them, they also didn't pick these up. And you would think they'd want to. I agree with you. I would have picked time to fill those up, but I don't know if this is the best example of using like the books as like an example of them doing something correctly.
Well, I mean, I think it didn't matter as much in the books because like that story isn't there in the books. Like that, it really is not. There's Reynard attacks them and it's horrifying, and then several books later, we learn that one of them is on like a revenge quest. Like that is not something that requires an answer to like, why is she doing this? We just know that she's doing this. Whereas like in the show, we have dealt with this issue for like 18 episodes, it feels like at this point. And like the way you answer that in with like minimal changes to what they've done here is that like the librarians are the ones who have control of this power, and she should go to librarians and say, you have control of this. Do you also have responsibility for wielding it when it needs to be wielded? Could you go wield this for me? And they go, no, because we're dicks. And then she goes, it's not to like bring in an in joke, but like you and I both have had this discussion before where like you can't go outside the system until you've proven that the system is not going to help you, right?
Yeah, no, I agree because I like this idea. I mean, they did a small version of this. I kind of like the idea of them suggesting that this is, I will say this, they've partially done some stuff with librarians. For example, Katie asks about killing a god and they're like, oh, we don't have it. And then Marley Mountain's character's like, they have everything. Like, don't let them lie to you. Okay, if that's the starting point, and now Penny's going to be like, and now they're going to try to get the spell and try to use the arguments you said, then this can be a good starting point. The problem we've had so far is that generally they probably are going to act like you said now, where it's just like she's going to go outside the system because the system was inherently assumed to be against her. And I agree. Like they do need some scenes and going forth in which like Penny's like, right, so can I get this god killing book? Because I know
I think overall in this episode, like there's a lot of things that I liked in here, knowing that like I won't like them when the setups are paid off or not paid off in the right way or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the big problems of the show, which is that especially these setup episodes, they have failed so many times at setup, it's getting harder and harder to trust them to do them correctly. And so you can't give shows, the rope you would normally give them when they have episodes like this because you're kind of already expecting the plot line to fail.
Yeah, I also, I mean, like, I don't know. I want more world building from them from this example because I feel like from this like ideas that because I feel like they gave me enough this episode to like confuse the shit out of me. Like I in the early going in the episode, I was watching them in the library and I was like, this is so stupid. Why don't wizards have their spells on their goddamn computers? And then we learned that like some of them do. and for some reason, like, they choose to use BuzzFeed rather than like a database. They have like a news site that secretly has spells. And it's like, well, then why doesn't Breakbills use that? Why doesn't everybody use that? What is happening here? What is this illegal? Are they hiding it from the library? Is the library imbued? Like, none of this like made sense to me, and I'm hoping that the show will like clarify some of this stuff, but I don't know that I have faith that they will do that.
I mean, right. My hope is that Penny's whole point is he's going to help like be the linchpin for exposing what's going on with the library.
Yeah,
and that's how we're going to find out a lot of stuff. And otherwise, I mean, that would help justify a lot of shit with them, certainly.
Yeah.
But, well, we inadvertently went into this storyline, and I'm kind of whatever with it. You know, as always, I enjoy pretty much everything the actress who plays Katie does. I just wish she had better material to work with, or better scene partners at times. But like, I do enjoy her just being like the only like functioning human on this show.
Yeah,
like, which is ridiculous considering she's like a junkie, and her mother was her home life was terrible, and she's just like the most normal person on the show.
Yeah, she's the only person who has like normal human reactions to things.
She has normal human reactions to things, which, you know, it works when Quentin doesn't have normal human reactions to things. It doesn't work when no one has normal, like everyone, like no one in the show doesn't have them, like, because it takes away like from the point of like Quentin's like specialness in that way.
Speaking of no one being fucking normal, let's talk about Fillory this episode.
Right. So one thing I want to say quickly before, since it is Fillory related, I did enjoy the conversation between Quentin and Elliot was interesting, because Quentin being like, I have to help Julia, and Elliot just kind of like, but like there's like all these thoughts in Elliot's head, like eyes of him just being like, but you're supposed to be a king. God damn it. I have to be a king. I'm planning this wedding, and you just keep going off to help whatever girl's currently in need of your help.
Well, it's interesting because, like, it's an interesting moment of I think, intentional hypocrisy, intentional on the part of the writers, not on Elliot's part, of Elliot, in that, like, Elliot has, like, learned that he has to take on certain responsibilities and be true to those, and he doesn't seem to get that, like, to Quentin has responsibility in his head for Julia and for Alice because of how deeply he cares about them and how much he has wronged them. And Elliot doesn't seem to get that, and I thought that was a really interesting character moment for him.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of been them trying to reconcile how much Quentin's loyalty to both Alice and Julia has been kind of a conflict in general. Like, in the case of Julia, it's because obviously, like, they have no reason to like her. In the case of Alice, as they were up earlier, there was a big fact of, like, you know, they kind of had the acknowledgement of, like, they weren't actually her friends. It was just their friends with Quentin, and she was a package deal with Quentin. And so that, you know, that's made it part of it too, which is like, you know, I do wonder if at some level, this is where I wish we had more. You do wonder at some level if part of it is, it's like Elliot's like, I keep thinking I almost have you back. And then, like, you know, you keep having to go off to these things that, like, we're not connected to at all. And it makes him question if he's ever going to be connected to these things.
I think I see that in the actor, but not in the show. And that, like, if the show,
the actor does that, definitely. The show,
the actor is certainly, like, feeling the weight of the fact that, like, every time Quentin leaves, it's like months and months before he sees him again. Whereas the show is like, when Quentin is away, is really not doing a good job of, like, showing that there's a Quentin-sized hole in these Fillory storylines.
Right, and I think that's another example of why it's kind of, that's the reason. The other reason why it's like they have to figure out a way to take away the friends he does connect to over there, or else there's no real way to break him, because like you said, he's just not connected to Fillory at this point.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the other thing they could possibly do is, I wonder if this is setting up where, like, Elliot himself just banishes Quentin as for the good of Fillory. And it's more like Quentin doesn't ever realize what's been going on. And so the idea is to see more that, like, Elliot's forced to do this for, like, Fillory, and he chooses that over Quentin. And then that type of moment is like a realization, you know, then Quentin basically realizes what he had, and, like, but now doesn't have it at all. They could try to do a version like that.
But then, like, this episode probably had, like, the worst Elliot moment in a very long time, when, like, in a moment that I feel like kind of broke a lot of the stuff that they've been doing with him, or ran counter to it so harshly that it really stuck in my craw, which is the moment when he's when he's like, Josh, did you roofie the dishwasher? That's not cool. And Josh is like, no, I just made him so aroused that he fell unconscious. And I'm like, that's kind of what a roofie is. But like the same scene, Elliot acknowledges that roofing someone is bad, and then Josh is like, I'll make a love potion to make the Fillorians love you, and Elliot's like, okay, and I'm like,
no, the opposite. You did it in the wrong order. What happens is Josh shows up to cook, like Elliot gets him to cook food, and then Josh brings him the food.
Okay, you're right. Those were separate scenes.
And so what happens is that at first Elliot's just like, I need you to do food, and Josh is like, well, I can't make good dishes if you only let me use like Fillorian garbage.
Yeah.
And Elliot though is trying his best to be more of the people, and you get the great line where he reveals that Nate Silver's a wizard, which makes sense.
Yeah. No, hold on. I was going to actually lead into that in a funny way, if I can do that.
Oh, okay, fine. So we have
David.
What?
I have a question for you in the form of a URL. www.isnatesilverwitchernot.com.
Is that a real thing?
Yes. So after the I think the 2012 election, there was like right before the election, somebody made a website saying, is Nate Silver a witch? And it had like a thing that would update after the election as to whether he had correctly predicted the election, and it was like, yes, Nate Silver is witch.
Right, since he predicted the election to a startlingly accurate degree in 2012 and in 2008-ish, but 2012 was the one where it was really unexpected, and he was the closest. I mean, they were the closest people in this past election. So, yeah. But that aside, he brings that up, and then basically at that point, Josh goes, oh, a love potion, I can make that instead. And then while he was testing the love potion, they discovered what it actually did was just put them unconscious. And so then they used that to like disable all of the Foo Fighters. I did like how they have that scene between him and Baylor, and it looks like they're all bros now, and then it turns out Baylor's just fucking with them. I actually kind of like that. I thought that was a nice.
I actually kind of liked it the other way, because like when Josh comes in with the plate of half-eaten nachos, I was expecting this plotline to be in the direction of like, Elliot's rejected all these dishes because they're not good enough for the wedding, and then Josh is like, what about this simple plate of nachos that this Fillorian loves? And Elliot's like, it's genius, and they like win them over with like trashy American food.
Well, I like that too, but I just think I felt it was nice not to hand wave away. Baylor hasn't been on screen since he was captured. So you don't get to earn the like Elliot's won over a Foo Fighter thing with like no other scenes about it, and so I felt that was the show acknowledging their agreement in that fact.
Yeah, but just like, I mean, this whole thing like highlighted, one of the main problems I've talked about with the storyline before is that like there was a whole fucking scene asking the question, why don't the Fillorians like him? And we didn't get a goddamn answer. And his response in the show was, I'm not going to keep trying to find out. I'm just going to drug them all into liking me, which is like horrible. And not in keeping with being a king, because what are you a king of if not a people?
Yeah, no, I mean, so far all we know is they don't like him because, he's not Fillorian. But you're right. It doesn't really make sense why after he has that speech where he says all the stuff he's done for them. And it's like, it's true. It does seem like they would like him now. Like he did the duel to get them to like him, and apparently it did nothing.
Yeah,
like, which does seem weird. It seems weird that nothing literally changed. Like I could understand if he was like, I think the storyline would have made more sense if actually like his numbers just weren't raising enough, and he was getting desperate, and then he was willing to do something terrible like the love potion to do it because he was getting, like it would have fit a lot better if his like came obsessed with getting the numbers, as opposed to in this one where it's like it doesn't really make sense why he's this hated.
And it doesn't make sense why he's just flippant about drugging his subjects into liking him.
Yeah, that was pretty bad. Look, just like it's bad that I'm glad Margot told someone about the deal. I guess I accept the fact that at least they brought up the fact that it wasn't like, at least they didn't try to do the stupidity of like she's not telling them because she doesn't know how to. It's like she's not telling them because she's like, I'm going to fix it. It's fine, which is foolish, but like not awful.
Well, except that she apparently hasn't been doing anything, and it's been like 3 months.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying she's doing it well. I'm just saying at least technically that's what she's saying.
She even when Elliot told her to go talk to Fen, she forgot to go do it. Like, am I wrong? Is that what happened there?
I don't think she forgot. I think she just didn't. And then when Elliot asked her, she lied and said she did, and then she decided to actually go do it. I don't think she forgot. Let me put it that way.
You think she just blew it off and then decided not to blow it off for some reason?
I think she basically was like building up the courage to do it, and she just hadn't yet, and then she did. I mean, that storyline's so weird. Like, I don't know why the fairies decided to take her. They're like, we have to honor, like, we're going to honor the deal. I'm like, but like, I don't think part of the deal was you got to capture her.
No, I understand that very much. Like that's classic fairy. Like they were fine just keeping an eye on her in the castle until she basically said, "I declare my intention to try not to follow through on this deal." In which case they were like, "Oh, then we're going to take you away from here to ensure that you follow through on it." That's like perfect fairy logic.
It's perfect fairy logic, but at the same time, also based on perfect fairy logic, that is not part of the deal, so it gets complicated.
Margaret was sort of all over the place this episode. Like on the one hand, she had like one of the most like Margot/Janet moments of the entire show for her, which is her just like sitting at the table with Elliot being like, "Would it be weird if I fucked Josh?" I enjoyed that moment. But then on the other hand, like her line reading when she was like the fairies asked for something in exchange and Fen is like, "What?" And she's like, "Your baby?" Like, that was like, fuck you, Margot.
Yeah, I mean, the scene didn't work well too because like Margot at least had when you said everything, that speech could have gone better. I don't know. Yes, Margot had two great moments: the Josh moment, and then her just like absolute like no, like Quentin, get the fuck out of here and do something. I just need you to go away. You're like driving me crazy. I can't deal with this. Type thing. Go be Fillory. Go be errand boy with the button. Do things.
Yeah.
I did enjoy that, but yeah, it was a weird episode. In general, the Florian stuff is just kind of like, I don't know, whatever. Like the wedding's happening. Yay. The scene between Elliot and Finn was actually kind of nice. Just in that, like, he legitimately was concerned about her.
Yeah, well, we're sort of like, I don't know how I feel about this part because like we're all of a sudden in like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell with like the secret fairies hanging around that nobody's talking about.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a little weird. I'm just saying I did enjoy like Elliot like trying to talk to her and legitimately like be like are you okay with this, and like he definitely like this wedding thing, he's not going to, he's not going to stop it, but he does seem to like genuinely care about like her feelings in this matter. And it was a nice, sweet moment, even if like it was combined with weird fairy shenanigans that he knows nothing about yet, which annoys me because I really wish he could have. Presumably he'll know about it now next week because maybe. I really hope the Changeling thing doesn't happen. Please, God, no. I hate Changeling storylines. They're the worst storylines. They're a waste. They only ever end in one way. They're a complete waste of time. I've like basically that is like a fantasy trope that I've basically decided is just pointless, and it is at this point something not worth it in any way, shape, or form. Doing I guess it's possible. I could be wrong. Vampire Diaries pulled off one last version of it in like a later season, but that was a kind of minor miracle, and even then I was kind of like
Well, I think part of the problem here is that like there's nothing so far about this fairy storyline that is in any way like a deconstruction of this trope the way that, to the show's credit, they at least try to do with lots of the other magic going on, because it needs them to be like scary bad guys, and yet they're also not like interesting enough or like far enough away from the traditional idea of fairies, unlike their other scary bad guys. It's just like all around kind of, I don't know what's happening here.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Presumably, maybe it's to give. Maybe they're trying to use it to help set up like. Maybe that's how they're trying to do a version of their like magic war. Since the Fae could best the Wellspring, it's like this is also going to be a threat to all magic, but they can't quite set up like the giant god battle that happens in the second book. So they're trying to use like the Fae. to do like a version that's not quite as impossible to film.
I'm just giving you all the rope you need to try and come up with a version of this that makes sense.
I mean, to me, that's about the only thing I can possibly think of. I mean, I have a couple things to base this on, which I guess we can just go and get into. Because, I mean, look, we're done with this episode. There's not much else to talk about. The Quentin stuff is honestly the only stuff worth talking about, other than plot points. And Julia, by extension. Julia also being allowed to leave her own plot line of the main, like, her, like, plot line, as opposed in just her emotional plot line, is beyond that one, has really helped. Like, it's definitely true that when like you can just separate her from like, I guess she's been forced to have so many things because she's had her own show for so long, her getting to she actually benefited from being able to join another show, whereas Quentin, has been benefited from avoiding his show. So it was a really interesting.
Well, Julia, I think like the key isn't that Julia is off of the Reynard plotline. The key is that like she is no longer the like gleeful sociopath that she was in the last 2 episodes. She starts this episode with both the show in terms of the cutaway between the 2 Julias to show us the contrast, and then just in her character is like she has a goal now. She has something that she feels bad about. She is like cognizant of her own emotional limitations now in a way that she was not before. And so now that we're getting more of that interiority, Julia is like once again a character that we can care about.
And she also paid off what we thought, which was that like it's very clear that like Penny and Quentin matter to her. So like matter even without the ability for her to know that they should, like the memory of knowing they matter is like enough to make her want to make them matter again.
Right.
And she's actually like, and she's not disconnected from things. Like her desire to be, she's using the memories of her past to help her try to reconnect.
Yeah.
I guess.
Before we move on, I should just like renew my objection since I haven't since our season 1 podcast that like Josh fucking sucks in this version, and I miss the book Josh very much.
Yeah, he's not good. And
I liked to that moment where Elliot was like, "God, Josh, you're just no good in a crisis," and then 2 seconds later was like, "Josh, would you sneak into this enemy encampment and perform the secret mission?"
Yeah. Look, this version of Josh it's not. I feel like I should say though, I don't think this version of Josh is terrible. This is just one of the examples where like the book version is so much more interesting that this generic version of him is just like.
I legitimately like don't like this version of him, not because I say that it's like poorly written, because as you say it's more just shallow, but just like I don't like that person. And I don't even know if I'm supposed to, but I definitely, like you said, the book Josh, I liked that person very much because he was both more interesting and had like a much more complex like.
Hold on a second. Brian, stop talking. Go in your room. Finishing podcasting. All right, sorry. Just do it again.
I don't remember how I started.
Well,
I mean, I don't. It's not even that I think that this version of Josh is like badly written. He's just like you said, just kind of shallow. It's just that I don't actually like this person. I think he's very like. I don't know. He just does not seem like a either kind or interesting in any way that should make me like him. And as you say, the contrast is pretty high with the book, where like that Josh is like not only interesting but a lot more likable and personable than this character.
Yeah, I mean that's true. It's really I just missed that. Like we've said this before, we missed that version of Josh. He's just a character in general, a really good character. He actually added quite a bit.
Yeah.
To the dynamic, and in a way that a character like that generally wouldn't. Like he was definitely like the 6th lead in a book. Feel like a real you could have made they did enough with him by the end, and he could have been like a real protagonist.
Well, he also like him and the other character who's just totally missing out of book 2 from the show are like they feel really good in the books, partly because they are the only character. They were some of the only characters who are not like kind of mopey and fucked up. Like Josh is a character who's like, I have some issues, but I'm not like upset about them, and I'm not like destroying everyone's lives around me because of them. And that makes them kind of breaths of fresh air.
Josh is certainly a breath of fresh air, but the other character doesn't count because she didn't have to experience some of the things that everyone else did. So of course she should be that way. So,
but everybody else is like socially fucked up before they do anything, just because of like the fact that they were like super nerds and then super magic nerds and then young adults.
Okay, fine, fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, speaking of nerd-based things, I was at WonderCon, and I did go to the Magicians panel.
Who was at the panel?
So, Quentin, Julia, so Jason Ralph, Stella Mauve, Maeve. The person announcing it there didn't know how to pronounce her name really, so definitely lost my chance to have the correct pronunciation given to me. And then the two showrunners, Sarah Gamble and the guy. So we're just gonna say the two showrunners. Sorry, okay. And the two showrunners. And sorry, it was a woman who did this. Let me do this again. So Quentin and Julie were there. So Jason Ralph and Stella Mauve. The woman who was the moderator didn't really pronounce it entirely with confidence, so it wasn't. I thought I was going to get more help with that than I did. And then the two showrunners were there, and they showed a scene from like this upcoming episode with the dragon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, plane's coming. Hold on.
Okay.
God damn it, plane. We're almost done.
Do you want me to ask questions, or are you just going to ramble?
I'll set this up, and then you can ask. You can kind of just ask questions like you're there, whereas I'm talking about it. Just kind of guide it.
Okay.
How they used to do it. And then they sorry. And then so they were there, and they kind of basically first they kind of gave us some scenes from the upcoming episodes, and I got to see a little bit of the stuff with the dragon they're going to deal with. So it just kind of give me a little more information of why I'm kind of suggesting some things about what would be happening with Quentin
mm-hmm.
and Julia, because they are going to the underworld next episode.
Ooh.
This upcoming episode, yeah. And the price the dragon charges to help them go to the underworld, well, you won't have to worry about that button MacGuffin anymore.
So what you're saying is the price is a first edition Blu-ray of Speed Racer?
Yep, it's totally what it is.
That's gonna be hard to get. They might have to trade a button for that.
I know. So they all talked to us, and what it kind of reinforced was why I always kind of have faith in this show, which is you hear the showrunners speak, and the plot lines they seem to think they're like every time they say. Usually, when you see me, like when I try saying, "Oh, this is what I think the show is trying to do," and there's very little evidence to support it,
mm-hmm.
the showrunners didn't say that exact same thing. And so it's clear that they are visualizing a certain storyline. It's just sometimes they aren't able to quite do it.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like you hear them say it though, and I can tell the arc they're trying to do with Quentin, and they said it. And you're like, okay. And you can tell the arc they're trying to do with Julia. You can tell the arc they made a big deal about how like this season they really want to bring up this idea of growing up and like what that means, and using like ridiculous situation to show growing up in different ways, just stuff we have talked about in these podcasts throughout this season. In fact, that's part of the strength we've said of this season, and one reason we have liked it a lot better. It's a theme like that has been present for the whole season for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it does seem weird, like they never quite seem to hit the marks entirely, or they oversell things. For example, I actually had to go to the panel before I could see this past week's episode.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was told about the alternate timeline stuff. And the way they made it sound like this episode was going to be them like jumping around all these alternate timelines, doing all this cool stuff. And then in fact, we were there for like 20 seconds with Julia, and then literally 2 minutes with Quentin Malice.
Which now that you say that, I'm like, boy, that would have been a really cool episode. I wonder why they didn't do that. Like yeah, that's depressing.
And so it did cut right. And so like part of it is also, I think that what's killed me is when the Magicians, the biggest problem I think I found with the show is whenever the show seems to act like it's a bigger deal, like it's done more than it has, and the expectation too high is when everything comes crashing down. When you're going into it, and you're like, okay, well, see if we can do this and do things well. It's cool. It works pretty well. But a lot of times what happens is they think, it's kind of like how you said, that one scene between Quentin and Julia where way back where they have that 2-minute conversation about Quentin being like, are you okay? And then instead of them talking out their issues, like they just kind of argue and then leave. And then Ice Space is like, I think the show thinks this is what happened. And I think that is. The show thinks at times it does certain things and it hasn't actually done it.
Yeah, well, it's an age-old problem in writing of like perspective, where the story, and it's very hard to kind of take yourself out of that mindset and go, okay, but what does the audience know? What are they thinking at this moment, not knowing what happens next, and how do I like guide their understanding? And I think that is one of the things the show falls down on a lot.
Right, and so Jason Ralph actually brings up like how a lot of the show, the storylines this season was about. God damn it. I have no real way of threatening you playing because I don't want anything to happen to you because that would be terrible. But curse you.
Just put a curse on a library return card.
So like Jason Ralph talked about how he brings up this idea that like a lot of the season was about people not being able to talk to each other. And if they just had talked to each other, we could have resolved a lot of these problems. And of course, I'm sitting there going, right, but the show didn't give me a good enough reason for why they actually didn't talk to each other. That was the problem. You acknowledge what should have been you were correct in acknowledging a problem, but then you failed to follow through because you rushed through it of why, for example, like as we talked about, why there was this time crunch happening between Quentin and Julia, and they couldn't have just said, like, Quentin's like, we have a time crunch, we have to do this, and Julia's like, I have to do this, and then together they work together timing and making this work, and then you have something go wrong there.
Yeah, and on top of that, like, it's very hard to, without being more explicit than the show like ever is about its themes, to like convey to an audience that like the flaw in your plot is an intentional thing that you're aware of, that we should be aware of. Rather than just like you being a shitty writer, because there's so many stories out there that have what's called the idiot plot, where like, if the characters weren't idiots, this would be solved immediately. If they just said, 2 sentences to each other, then this whole disagreement would go away. That's usually just bad writing. And in order to make it a story about like how, communication is key, you have to like convey that lesson in some more overt fashion than the show does.
It's a tough thing to do. It's same thing. If you want to do things where you're going to actually like challenge a writing flaw by like using it, but then like turning it on its head, it's always complicated. You can't, because you have to use the writing flaw to do that. And you have to prove you're using it on purpose, or be willing to take the consequences of having used it for a while and then fix it. But like, there's always going to be some issues. And so like, there's, like I said, this show is not the easiest show to write in general. So like, that's part of why I've always been willing to give them a little bit more leeway, combined with the fact that at least there's some showrunners, you hear them talk, no idea what the fuck they're doing, or have any clue what direction the show should go, or even just, their ideas are terrible. Basically, everyone who talks about Sleepy Hollow, who's been a showrunner for it, has had that problem for a while. They'll speak and you just listen to what they think the show is, and they're just wrong. When the magicians showrunners speak, what they say actually works really well. And it's their version of a show. It's not quite the book, but I can live with that. Like a lot of what this show's platonic ideal version is, I actually like this show. It's not as good as the books, but whatever. I can live with that. It's unfair. It's an unfair burden to put upon a show. It has figured out its own way. They acknowledge themselves. And plus, like the showrunners acknowledge themselves. They kind of acknowledge the problems they had in the first season, and how they didn't really know what they were doing, how it took the second season to figure out kind of like their way of writing. And so you can see they're learning, which is like, it's just nice to see. Now, look, I'm not saying excuse everything, but it's like, it does make it harder at times it does make me want this show to succeed more, knowing that like they seem like they're getting closer, but it does get frustrating when they just kind of then go back further and further again, or not commit to things or whatever.
It's just, to me, like you take that as a reason to like give them a little slack, and I take the exact opposite route, because like they know how ambitious a show they are trying to make, and like I can see it, and therefore they should be able to see it, that like they are not capable of fulfilling that ambition. They're just like not good enough to do a show this difficult and complex. And like that's why they're failing. They're just not good enough. It's not there's no like if we try harder it'll work. It's just like no, you're not good enough for the show. And it makes me angry that they have like taken the show for themselves and tried to do it and failed so badly at it.
I still don't agree that that's quite true. I just think that I'm not entirely on the thing that they're clearly not good enough to do this version of a show based on what their version is. Because my bigger problem is they don't commit enough to what their version of the show is the other problem. Like they're just inconsistent. Like, but to be fair, part of it is because they kind of explained, for example, how they decided to do the whole Wellspring thing.
Yeah, talking about that because I'm definitely curious as to what their.
So they did say look, they acknowledged one of the elephants in the room, which was, well, how are we going to stop the beast from just getting to the Wellspring before the rest of them? There's like no real way to stop this. In terms of like, so they acknowledge that was a problem, which is an actual problem. Like there was like a thing of like when they finally like went there was really no reason why he wouldn't have just gotten there before then and then drink it. It's over. Mm-hmm. And so they had to come up with a reason. And they said they had everyone throw out ideas in the room, which isn't a bad idea, but effectively what happened was one guy came up with the idea of Ember shitting in it. Mm-hmm. I thought it was hilarious. I didn't want to say it, and they told him to, and then he said it, and they were like, oh, wow, that is hilarious, and they just went with it. Which means they just kind of like, which is like an example of an audacious type of thinking, but at the same time, I think like, I'm like, well, you just didn't go far enough with that, and you stopped at like the worst version of it, because like it didn't really make sense, and then there was no real good setup for it, or more importantly, you didn't even go back and figure out a way to help make that make more sense or like further establish. Like I knew Ember was clearly doing that on purpose based on stuff, but I think the show could have done a better job of making it more clear why that was Ember's decision to do something, or make it where make it more clear that the characters got through to Ember to try to do something or something.
Well, my problem with that moment is never really been that moment. It's that moment that they just kind of decided was funny, then became like the fulcrum on which the entire like second half of the season plot, or at least for most of it, like turned. That's the problem with it.
And that's the second part follow with it, which is that they didn't quite know how to set it up beforehand or after, and so that's kind of an issue. I mean, they also talked about how they kind of came up with the writing for the musical number, and like that actually was really solid writing. It was like he basically said that in the original version of it, Elliot was sad. And then they were at the battle, and Elliot was ready for the battle. And he was like, this doesn't make any sense. And they were just trying to come up with something, and then they realized they could do a musical number for it there. And he likes doing musical numbers, so he did. So they made one. And, which is fine, because to me, like, that's what it accomplishes. I know, and I actually liked that scene for the most part, even if it wasn't as even if, as you said, it wasn't as earned as it could have been. Mm-hmm. But I liked that scene. It worked pretty well. And quite frankly, if you want to do more of those, go ahead. It's fine. So, like, you hear their writing process, and works really well. And, I mean, one thing I guess also helps is they cast the show so well, for the most part, that, which we talked before, and that just helps. And, hearing the characters talk about this has helped as well. And they also ask the questions. Some people ask them questions about, like, Jason Ralph talk about why his Quentin character isn't as emo as the Quentin in the book is. Mm-hmm. And he gave a really interesting answer about how he's not trying to be that, like, he's trying to be honor the book and do this and things like that. Because people mainly brought up the idea that like, people are like, you're so much more likable than Quentin is in the book. And then, of course, Jason Ralph said the answer I've always said, which is like, I actually liked Quentin in the book for reasons. And then but he said the key thing, which is like, he came off really well and really afflicted me as a, like, privileged white. He's like, a middle-class privileged white dude. And I was like, well, yeah, that makes sense. So, it kind of, hearing him say that kind of made you realize, feel like why he's a good fit for that character. And then, listening to Stella talk about Julia, same thing. Like, you see the fits of why they work, and they both acknowledge how much they enjoy working together. Which, of course, in my head made me internally just scream like, this is like, just let them work together all the time. This is ridiculous. Why are you like wasting? You let Margot and Elliot work together all the time. Stop wasting your strong pairings for reasons that make no sense.
Did they talk about Penny at all?
No. No one asked questions about it. They didn't talk about it. No, absolutely not. I wish part of me is kind of like, maybe I should have asked these questions. Someone should have asked these questions, but no, like I said, it was a fun panel. Like, it was an engaging thing. It always gives me a little bit of hope about things. This show never does, to me, this show does never does quite enough to make me last week's episode was about one of the only ones that really broke me.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, I at least end like kind of okay with how things are and roughly okay with the direction. And I'm kind of like, unlike last season where I kind of had to force myself to watch episodes,
Mm-hmm.
I have not found that to be the issue as much this season. I at least kind of want to watch them. And
like
I'm more at
this
peace
episode was like, I was like, I was having fun. There were good jokes. There, they're like nits to pick and things, but like most of my problem with this episode is just knowing that they're not going to follow up on this stuff the way that they should.
Yeah, I mean, that's frustrating. It's hard to say. I mean, like I said, I still at least roughly enjoy the show. I guess I've tried really hard this season to really figure out how to separate my hatred for the show, my annoyance to the shows, that make them not book based. It's just not fair to the show. It's not fair to any show. It's, but like it's not, but it's not, especially not fair to this show. So
I've tried to hold up the book as like not an example of like it needs to be more like the book, but just an example of like the book did this thing you're trying to do very well. Why are you like doing something that's worse?
Yeah, no, that's true. But yeah, I mean, so that was the panel. It was fun. I was glad I went to it. The questions were actually mostly okay from the audience, which was fun. They were all very engaging. It's like I said, for whatever reason, it's one of the reasons I also always kind of want to like cheer for the show, which is probably good because if both of us were completely dead inside towards the show, this would be a really depressing podcast. So at least one of us has to have some semblance of hope.
The Fillorian death march to the end of the season. No, I mean, for the same reason, I'm glad I didn't go to WonderCon and to the panel because I would have just like stood up to ask a question and I would have either just like scowled at them for as long as it took them to usher me away from the microphone, or I would have just been like, "Why do you suck?" And just like gone off on them. But that would have been rude.
Yeah, very rude. don't do that. So yeah, don't be rude, people. That's the overall lesson of this. I think
we've all learned that really.
Yeah. So thanks for listening. We have to go now.
You always forget that's edition of that. The first thing is that's it for this edition of the podcast, and then I do the plugs, and then you say thanks for listening, and you do the joke.
Fine. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks for listening. We have to go now. There is still a lot of wedding cake to pick out for the Kraken's upcoming multi-dimensional nuptials to Blurgeon.
To who now?
I just said a random word.
To Blurgeon?
I just made up a random word. You want to use a different? Go ahead.
No, I'm making fun of you in character. This is a bit.
That was a bit?
Yeah. A bit.
Okay. Well, I already ruined the bit, so.
It's
hold on. Let me do something different. I was trying to do a wedding themed one, but it doesn't make sense for the Kraken to go into the. Okay. We have to go now. The Kraken has wedding cake to pick out. Not because like there's a wedding happening, just because the Kraken demands wedding cakes, so we have to go pick them up.
Okay.
Stopped.
I will say there were moments in this episode where I was like you clearly did like a funny pass in this episode just to punch up the funny, and there were moments where I'm like, show you like this is funny, but like you need to take your storyline a little more seriously than this. Like there was like the classic like joke set up where they're like where they're in BuzzFeed and she's like she's like, oh, this one is secretly a spell, and they're like, wow, what about this one? And they're like, oh, that's just a clickbait article. And I was like, come on, guys.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I don't know, I like that joke, but yeah, that I understand what you're saying.
It was such a like vaudeville joke that like I respected it as a joke, but I was also like, this is not the tone of the show it should be taking, really.
Yeah,
because it's already so weird what it was doing with that BuzzFeed place.
Yeah, it was a weird thing.
Yeah.
That's
definitely like the silliest world building they've done yet, I think.
I liked, but it was silly, but it was enjoyable because of that. Like I enjoyed how like absurdly ridiculous that world building was. Because it's just like, what is going on?
I guess.
It just felt more like I don't know. It fit the vibe of the show. Like I think my biggest annoyance, like I said, this year is that like I feel like the show at least finally knows what it is, but even then it can't commit to that.
Yeah.
If it could at least commit to that, I'd be a lot better off this week.
Yeah, it was really like that. It's not so much that moment bothered me as like I felt like this episode in particular like had like way too many different tones all over the place.
Yeah,
like,
that's what I'm saying. Like
the BuzzFeed is kind of this like cheesy satire, and then there's like there's practically like kind of Regency like slapstick going on in the Fillory plot line with like Elliot acting like a ridiculous like king, and then like the Quentin Alice stuff is like really like emotional sci-fi, and then like it's just like a bunch of different shit.
Yeah. No. I mean, yeah, it's always hard to balance different tones like that, but they've especially had trouble. And their strengths are definitely the horror side